Welcome everyone to the second day of OFA Regions 4 through 8 Tribal TANF and New Program meeting. My name is Capricia Randolph Robinson, and I have 29 years of progressive experience in the field of human services, 7 years in non-for-profit, working in child welfare, 16 years in state government with the Illinois Department of Human Services, and 6 years in federal government, working with OFA in Region 5. As we get started today, we will go over our agenda for the day, as well as do another short icebreaker. However, before we do, I want to highlight a few asks of yesterday's final presentation on the OFA DEI work. Remember to be more inclusive, equitable, and develop effective partnerships with the tribes. The Beyond OFA Tribal DEI Work Group will be hosting listening sessions, consultations with tribes to provide more insight on issues and help prioritize this work. Rebecca, Elizabeth, and Patrick have asked for initial feedback and suggestions on the DEI initiative and proposed learning sessions. Please send any feedback, comments to rebecca.horsechief@acfhhs.gov. You can check the chat for Rebecca's exact email address. Next slide. As we mentioned on yesterday, today and tomorrow, we'll each focus on a separate theme for the whole day. Today's theme is in-demand jobs and employment partnerships. The theme was chosen based on the feedback we received from you as a part of the earlier planning for this meeting. As we continue to grapple with the effects of COVID, today, we hope to explore our current economic experiences and circumstances and how that's impacting our ability to connect TANF and new customers to jobs, and for our programs to connect with employment partners. As we cover the theme throughout the day, we will first be having a plenary session where we hope to learn about promising and innovative employment partnerships. We will then have an opportunity to discuss among peers employment opportunities. Those conversations are meant to be informal and will be led by several tribal TANF and new program leaders. Finally, we hope to brainstorm and work together to create something that may help you and your programs continue to explore ways to connect TANF and new customers to in-demand jobs or build partnerships with employers in your communities. For the final session, the template we'll be working from was emailed earlier this week to everyone. And in case you're on the phone, it will also be shared at the Create session via a screen share by our moderators, so everyone on Zoom can see it. Next slide. Now for that fun icebreaker poll. What is one thing you hope to do that's fun for either fun for work or just fun in the future? Think bucket list items. Please just go ahead and add your bucket list items in the chat. Let's see what some of those fun things. Someone said travel to Egypt. Someone said just to be physically fit. Let me go. I needed my glasses. John said going to New Zealand or Iceland. Wendy said travel out of the country. Someone said to publish more books, I think it is. Vacation to Greece, Puerto Rico. Oh, all of these sound fun. Skydive. I might be a little scared of that one. These are all wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'm going to now, it's my pleasure to hand it over to LaMonica. She will be taking it over from here for our plenary session for the day. Thank you, guys.
Hey folks, this is Steve. Before we get into the plenary, I wanted to just give a couple logistics updates. And thank you, Kapriska. And I know some of you saw this yesterday, but I wanted to make sure that you all had the same information, and we also added a couple things. So as mentioned earlier, the meeting agenda, information about all of the speakers that you'll see, and session materials are available on the Visible Meeting website. You go to the agenda, click on the session, and you can download materials, or click on a speaker and you can get their bio. I know that there were a couple of folks that had issues downloading some of the files that were posted in the chat yesterday. We also included them in a Dropbox link. But if you do have issues downloading materials, just check with your regional program office and they'll make sure that you get the materials. We want this to be interactive, so you all have the ability to mute and unmute whenever you wish to speak, particularly in the breakout room. So we want to make sure that you just are careful to remain on mute until you are asked to speak or until you have a question. We do have live captions available. If you're interested, you can see those by clicking on more at the bottom of your screen and then show subtitle, and the caption should appear. Particularly today, because of the breakout rooms, we would ask, if necessary, if you could rename yourself for discussion purposes. Often when folks join Zoom, they have their initials or some sort of number, zip code, all types of things. If you could just rename yourself by hovering over your participant name in the participant list, there's a button with 3 dots to the right of your name. You click on that and you can click on rename and just put your first and last name so that folks would be able to call on you if you have a question and address you directly. At any point, you can submit questions for presenters in the chat box. We mentioned the breakout rooms. There will be one room where you are randomly assigned, where you don't have anything to do. You'll just be magically transported into the room. And then there's a self-select later in the day where you will be asked to join the room of the region in which you are located. So we'll provide you with some more information about that. There will be some polls. We just did one, as you saw. We will also do a multiple choice poll a little later where you can vote directly on the screen. And make sure that you provide us your input on the evaluation survey at the end of the meeting. And of course, at any point, if you need any tech assistance, please request help in the chat box and we will be there to assist. All right, thanks everybody. Now I will turn it over to LaMonica to get us started with the first plenary.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to kick off today's meeting. So we're going to jump right into our plenary. We have a list of panelists that I'm going to introduce. This is a session called After COVID Economy, In-Demand Jobs and Employment Partnerships. Next. So my name is LaMonica Shelton. I'm with OFA, the Office of Family Assistance, and I am the TANF Program Manager for Region 4. That's the southeast part of the country. And I'm going to be facilitating today's discussion. Next. So before we go much further, I'd like to just kind of start with a poll. And what you're going to do is you're going to just put your answers into the chat if you don't mind. What are some of the biggest challenges your program faces in forging employer partnerships today? And we're asking that question for a good reason. If you wouldn't mind putting some items into the chat, your responses, that would be helpful. What are some of your biggest challenges facing you as you're attempting to forge employer partnerships today? I think your responses will not only help the panelists as we bring forth this discussion, but it also will help the OFA staff as they work with you in your region and think about technical assistance in the future. So go ahead and enter your items into the chat, please. Are there any challenges whatsoever? I know that we have them. While you're thinking about that and getting your answers in, understanding our programs, that's great. I'll tell you a little bit about today's discussion and kind of our perspective for bringing it forward after working with all of you for the last 2.5 years. So it's no secret, COVID has had a profound and definitely a very memorable impact on all of us, on individuals, on families, on our programs, on our communities. Really, it's had a profound and memorable impact on the entire world. So we all have faced temporary and also permanent changes in how we think about and operationalize our work. For example, before COVID, we would have been face-to-face at one of our regional meetings, but instead we're doing things virtually. And I think we're learning more and more how to do that more effectively. May not be ideal, but we're improving. So since the pandemic, we've experienced all these changes as we've also seen employment statistics bounce down and up, housing prices skyrocket, gas prices increase, the cost of housing soar, and food increase as well, and so on and so on. We hear all kinds of things in the news, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's real, and we're hoping that this session will kind of help set some of the record straight. So during the session, presenters will discuss the impacts COVID has had on the economy and workforce, and we'll also talk about trends for in-demand jobs post-COVID. Our presenters will also identify and discuss critical employment-related partnerships for Tribal TANF and for new programs to help all of our programs and program customers navigate a post-COVID economy. And finally, at the end of the session, there will be time for Q&A from all of you. And we will also introduce a quick tip video, which we hope is helpful to everyone as they're thinking about their programs. So in the chat, we see some of the challenges. Childcare continues to be a challenge. Transportation is a big challenge. Being in rural areas and having less jobs, very challenging. Understanding why employment rates are so high. Maybe that means unemployment, but we definitely were talking a little bit more about that. Finding people who want to work beyond a day labor position, all important and real issues. So what we're going to do is we're first going to open up with a speaker, and then we're going to be followed by others who will be on a panel. So our opening speaker this morning is Miriam Jorgensen. Dr. Jorgensen is a research scientist at the University of Arizona within the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, and she holds the additional titles of Research Director of the University of Arizona Native Nations Institute and Research Director of the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. Dr. Jorgensen's work on Indigenous governance and economic development has addressed issues as wide-ranging as child welfare policy, policing and justice systems, natural resource management, cultural stewardship, land ownership, tribal enterprises, housing, financial education, asset building, and philanthropy. All of the panelists' bios, including Dr. Jorgensen's, are on the website where you found the agenda. So I won't go into further detail about all of the accomplishments that everyone has. But after Dr. Jorgensen finishes with her presentation, then we have our panelists who also will be presenting. And they are Delia Smith with Community Resource and Economic Support Director with the United Nations, and then Barbara Mentoxen, also Economic Support Program Manager of the United Nations, and then Jonathan Crittenden, who's the TANF Manager of the Cherokee Nation, and Lana Chanda, Director of Employment and Training of the Gila River Indian Community. Unfortunately, as you will see on your agenda, we had Tammy Wickstrom also, who is going to be a part of the panel, but unfortunately she's unavailable to join us this morning. So we'll be thinking about her. But each will participate in a moderated panel to discuss their promising strategies. But first, we'll start off with Dr. Jorgensen.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am appreciative of that introduction. Next slide, please. As LaMonica talked about, my role here is to kind of set the stage. And I want to talk about sort of three big questions. I'm not going to answer any of them in tremendous detail, but again, just to kind of set the scene for the practitioner panel who are going to really drill down on the details of what's going on in their communities and with their programs. But I want to address these big questions. What economic and employment conditions and trends prevailed? I was asked to talk during the pandemic, but I think it's important to also think about what was going on before the pandemic to kind of ease into those during pandemic trends. To understand how COVID impacted employment opportunities in tribal communities, and to consider a bit about what in-demand jobs and employment partnerships may be on the horizon. I just want to remind you also, I'm going to talk extremely generally about these issues to sort of lay the groundwork for Indian country and American Indian and Alaska Native communities overall, and that the panelists will get down to the details. But I did want to kind of give you that overview. Next slide, please. Before I get going, I do want to acknowledge the homelands where my primary employer, which is the University of Arizona, are located. And I just want to pay respects to the Tanatam Nation, on whose unceded lands the University of Arizona is located, and to their elders, their elected, traditional, and emerging leaders, and to all other respected persons in that nation. And I also want to acknowledge the Pasquayaqui tribe, whose people also share the lands on which the University of Arizona is located, and to the 20 other Native nations whose lands share geography with the state of Arizona. And as LaMonica mentioned, I'm also affiliated with the Harvard Project in American Indian Economic Development, and I want to acknowledge the Massachusetts people on whose land Harvard University is located. Next slide, please. I want to start here, which is, this is the situation in Indian country before the pandemic hit. These are estimates we created at Harvard University in collaboration with Native Nations Institute to better understand how much effect the pandemic was really having on Indian country. So looking at that moment, the snapshot sort of 2017, 2018, before the pandemic hit in Indian country, it's important to understand just how massive the economy of native lands was. So this is trying to look across all tribal lands, native lands in the largely the lower 48 states, and thinking about what is the impact of those economies overall. And this, I want to say, is probably a lower bound estimate, because there are definitely areas, state recognized tribes, parts of Alaska Native nations that we're just not capturing in this. But we're looking at overall economic output from Indian country around $127 billion. And if you look at that next circle, that's really generating around 1.1 million jobs. Now, those are knock-on jobs as well. So these are jobs that aren't just in Native communities, but are elsewhere. And a number of them are employing non-Indigenous people. So the estimates were that there were over 200,000 American Indian jobs on tribal lands generated pre-pandemic. So we're talking pretty large economies, pretty large impacts, and a large number of American Indian people and non-Native people employed in these economies. Just to be benchmarking this a little bit, this is the same as any number of small states. are producing similar numbers of jobs. So Indian country is, I think we looked at it as similar to like Arkansas or something like that, as kind of clocking around that level. Don't quote me on that state, but thinking about some of those smaller state economies, Indian country is having that similar impact. Next slide, please. Here's another thing to keep in mind, and this is from data from Randy Aki and colleagues, looking at census data from the survey of business owners from realistically early in the teens. So we're looking at about a decade ago, but I think there are reasons to imagine that this was not tremendously difficult over the decade of the teens. And we have two different things here going on, which is what's going on Indian lands as opposed to the lands that are surrounding Native nations, and looking for what kinds of establishments are there, i.e. what kinds of employers are there, and then what kinds of actual jobs exist in these areas. So these aren't racially divided in terms of employments and jobs, but we're looking on Indian country and off Indian country. And the parity line says, if the bar is beneath that red parity line, that suggests that there are fewer of those kinds of employers or establishments in Indian country on that left-hand chart. But above that line means that there are more of those kinds of employers in Indian country. So if you look at the left-hand chart, you see that there are quite a few number of employers in what we might call natural resource businesses, and quite a few number of employers in educational services. So more than parity, more than comparison to those off-reservation lands. I think what's more interesting, though, is to understand what jobs were there. And this, again, is pre-pandemic information. We'll look at this again when we get some more data about the pandemic and post-pandemic. But in terms of jobs, which is the right-hand panel, you see that there's there's a fairly similar distribution of jobs, and in terms of the distribution of jobs available in Indian country and outside of Indian country, but there's more than a proportionate number of jobs in arts and entertainment and recreation, in accommodation and food, in public administration, and in management and administration. So you see those places where the bar jumps above the red line, and that's saying that there are more than a proportional number of these types of jobs in Indian country. So in tribal communities, the dominant areas in which people are employed are, again, these are broad swaths, broad sectoral understandings in management and administration, public administration, accommodation and food industries, and arts, entertainment, and recreation. Not a surprise to any of us who have been watching Indian country economies for as long as I have. We know that this is exactly the kinds of jobs that tend to be available on average in Indian country. But I think it's still worth thinking about as we look then at what was going on during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So if we switch our focus to the pandemic overall, I think it's exciting to note to you that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has finally started to produce a series of data on labor force participation, employment percentage of the population employed, and unemployment statistics for the American Indian and Alaska Native population generally. Now, you're going to hear me be very careful about phrasing that, because this is coming from Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census Department surveys, and they're of a racial group, the racial group that they understand to be the American Indian and Alaska Native population. So this is not on tribal land specifically, but I think that we know that there's, some anywhere between 30% of the multiple identifier population and 50 to 60% of the single identifier population from census data lives on or near tribal lands. So this is going to mirror a lot of what's going on in Indian country. So it's not Indian country data, but it's indicative of Indian country. So what you see with this series, the blue line is the population in the United States overall, and that jagged sort of yellowish line, yellow-brown line, is what's going on in the American Indian population. It's a jagged line because the data are messy and noisy, and you could run a smooth line through it, and you'd see that smooth line would be very similar to the US population overall, but that we have higher unemployment rates among the American Indian and Alaska Native population. Again, not a surprise, but I think it's really good to see it confirmed in the data. And then you get to 2020, 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, and you see that enormous spike where we go greatly into unemployment, and a spike that seems disproportional in Indian country to the rest of the nation. So if I could have the next slide, please. And we see this in when we kind of invert the data too. So the left-hand slide is the one we've just seen, which is unemployment rates among the American Indian Alaska Native population. And then on the right-hand slide, we have labor force participation, which is the percentage of those who are in the labor force or who are declared to be employed or seeking employment, who are participating, the proportion of the population who are employed or seeking employment. So this proportion drops dramatically. So you see that mirror image effect. It's going, labor force participation just plunges to just around 40% in the American Indian Alaska Native population overall. And we know that those plunges in Indian country in some cases were much more dramatic than that. And so in fact, the story when you look at these graphs is confirming what we know about Indian country. We can see in the American Indian Alaska Native population overall what the changes were. And the data really picks up those deep drops, the high rises in unemployment and the deep drops in labor force participation. So if we could go, I do want to pick up just one other thing though, which is that broad gray stripe that's off to the left in each one of these charts is the recession of the late noughts. So that's the recession of 2008, 2009 as marked. And you can see what was going on there was a pretty stark increase in unemployment and a stark decrease in the labor force participation. And really even by 2019, when we're kind of thinking that recovery is, at the strongest and we've got the best economies out there, we're really never at a rate with labor force participation that we're at before the earlier recession, although we are at a lower rate of unemployment for the American Indian population overall. So I think that that's an indicator that there are already some potential weaknesses in labor force participation in American Indian communities. Again, that's the percentage of the population that is either in employment or seeking employment. So it means that there's percentages of the population, and you could already hear that in some of the comments in the response to the survey question of something else is going on in this population, particularly in Indian country, that there might be less participation in the labor force. But let's go on to the next slide. And I want to bring up some data that was collected by the Center for Indian Country Development of the Federal Reserve Bank and of Minneapolis. And it's again picking up on data from the census. And it's trying to get at that question of, we suspect that there's something different going on in tribal communities on Native lands, but we don't have data for Native lands. The best we can do is disaggregate metro from non-metro areas. So, and again, it's not specific to Native lands, it's the American Indian and Alaska Native population overall. But you can see that American Indians and Alaska Natives living in metro areas do better on every scale. They have higher labor force participation, they have higher rates of overall employment within the population, and lower rates of unemployment. So that darker line, the darker line that's on the top in the first two bars and on the bottom in the bottom bar, shows you that in metro areas, there are more opportunities, not a surprise. But if you're working in a rural or more remote Native lands, American Indians living in those areas, which we know a large proportion, something like 60 to 70% of single identifier American Indians live in remote and rural areas, and typically in those areas, many of them live on and near reservations. Those are places where there's more unemployment, less labor force participation, and a lower rate of employment in the population overall. So each of those statistics capturing something a little bit different, but of course they're all related. Next slide though. Here we want to look at what's gone on during the pandemic, however, just looking at 2019 to 2022. If you look at those red bars, they're basically telling you that all of these levels were disrupted during the pandemic. You can see in that 2020 to 2021 period, particularly on the unemployment line, that big disruption that occurred. But if you think about leveling from 2019 to 2022, there doesn't seem to be a lot of change. Now, I think it's super important though to look at that data and always say, but it's just a racial group, so it's not capturing just tribal lands, and we lack sector by sector industry information. So in a sense, my talk at this point is a wash of, yeah, we knew that happened. But I think it's really important, and you could hear this in some of the responses to the survey earlier, of there's a lack of understanding of why native lands might be different from the American Indian population overall, or even from the general population in terms of its employment and unemployment trends. So at this point, I want to go back on the next slide to thinking specifically about Indian country and how you might talk to somebody who's looking at charts like the ones we just saw and said, hey, hasn't there been a complete recovery in Indian country? Aren't American Indian, Alaska Native jobs just back to normal and employment back to normal, whatever that was? I think the first observation comes from that chart that says, in a sense, Indian country still is seeking to recover from the recession of 2008, 2009 in terms of labor force participation. And more than that, we know that the American Indian Alaska Native population had these really, has this disproportionate balance toward jobs that are in the sectors of accommodation, recreation, arts, service industry kinds of jobs, where we all know that this kind of stuff fell much more dramatically during the pandemic than everything else. So if you kind of cross Indian country jobs with the effects of the pandemic, we know that those things together made the impacts worse in Indian country than in the rest of the economy overall, unless there were other, pockets of the economy that had a similar kind of job profile. So this, to me, this kind of statement out of the Commissioner's Corner from the Bureau of Labor Statistics just reminds us that whatever those general statistics say about the American Indian Alaska Native population overall, when we start to think in terms of what we know about tribal lands and employment and unemployment on tribal lands, things are going to be different and magnified by, or moderated, either magnified or moderated by the kind of job profile that is in American Indian nations. So let's go to the next slide and back to the kinds of charts we were looking at before. Remember, this is the data from before the pandemic, but let's think about what the pandemic and impact post-pandemic now is probably doing to these numbers. We don't have updated data of this sort yet. And in fact, some of this was collected again by Randy Aki, who was able to kind of go behind the veil of census data and get some of these numbers because of the, to get the approvals to look at reporting levels that are lower down than what the census makes publicly available. But we're going to speculate based on what we see here. First off, we know that there's going to be ongoing competition for service sector workers because some who left this industry, when recall that big drop that we saw, some who left this industry may never return. So we know that's true in the general population, but it's absolutely true in Indian country as well. Indian country opened up pretty rapidly again to try to get online its businesses, its hospitality businesses, its gaming businesses, its recreation businesses, things like that. But even in that time period, people were looking for other work, may have decided to not work, may have decided that the kinds of jobs that they had weren't the ones that they wanted. And so these industries where we've seen a lot of jobs in Indian country, those jobs maybe still exist, but it may be hard to fill them. So there's going to be competition for those kinds of workers. Some left who will not return to that sector. Next slide, please. What do we also know about what's going on with just federal spending in Indian country and the focus that the pandemic placed on Indian country in terms of other jobs? So absolutely, there's a lot of money through the CARES Act, through the American Rescue Plan Act, through the Infrastructure Plan, and through various other more targeted pieces of legislation or spending bills and of spending programs that really focus on facilities such as sewer, water, community buildings, electricity, broadband. If anything, the pandemic shone a spotlight on areas of Indian country where there were weaknesses in these infrastructure or community service-based needs. And there's money flowing to do this kind of work. So where there were fewer than proportional jobs in these areas, these may be places because of spending where there's more jobs now also opening up because of the spending. But it probably means that there needs to be skill development, there needs to be development of management and project management capacity to bring these things home, and programs to help direct workers to these areas. And I think that's important to also think about that some of these jobs may be shorter term as construction projects go into place, and thinking needs to take place about potentially how to make those jobs last longer and what are the enduring jobs in that sector. Next slide, please. And I think the other thing that we really saw was tribes focusing more on food sovereignty and on thinking about green energy, which were areas where there have always been conversations, lower level, sometimes nascent conversations, but a lot more focus in tribal communities on these. A lot of in the forums I was in and the conversations that I heard and the seeking funding from the federal government, from states, from tribal government, a lot more work in these areas. Some of it may be more private sector, particularly on the food sovereignty side. So also thinking about that there may be jobs developing here, but they might not be tribal government directed. And that's the last thing I want to say is that we run a number of programs at the Native Nations Institute for youth entrepreneurs. And one of the things that they reported to us consistently during the pandemic is that the pandemic focused them not on jobs that might be created by tribal government or in tribal government or working for tribal enterprises or working for more corporations. But instead, they felt that the pandemic forced them to think about what can I do to support myself? So there's an increasing focus on entrepreneurship and the ways that entrepreneurship might be applied to these different sectors, how people become increasingly, youth in particular, could become increasingly responsible for their own futures in tribal communities, not in a sense, not always wanting to trust that the tribal government would have a job available for them, having seen these dramatic drops in jobs during the pandemic. So I'm going to wrap with that and say, I don't really have any definitive answers for you, but looking at where jobs were before the pandemic and after the pandemic, there's a sense that a lot of recovery has occurred, but also a sense that the job market is changing, both in terms of the jobs that are available that are seeking workers and the kinds of jobs that are on the horizon because the money that's flowing to Indian country and because of the sort of changed preference profile that folks in Indian country have for work and surrounding work. So I hope that that kicks off the conversation that the practitioners will have with you. And I'm happy to take questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jorgensen, for that. We appreciate it. If we can move to the next slide. So we also appreciate that you're willing to stay around for some questions at the end. But for all the participants, if you want to start inserting those questions into the chat box, please feel free to do so. So now we're going to transition to our panelists. And I introduced them just a little while ago, but I'll ask them as they begin speaking, sharing information about their programs, if they would just very briefly introduce themselves again. As was mentioned yesterday a couple of times, I know definitely during the new breakout session, we were talking about how we all can be good resources to each other as peers. And so it's very helpful to have our peers here, practitioners, people who are doing this work every day as part of the TANF and or new program to talk about their experiences before, during, and after COVID as it relates to employment. So we will begin with Jonathan, then Delia and Barbara, and then Lana.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Crittenden. I am the program manager for the Cherokee Nation Tribal TANF program here in Oklahoma. Our program actually started in 2019. And just like I said, we are fixing to wrap up our first 3-year plan. And of course, we started our program right at the midst of the COVID pandemic. So we encountered a lot of difficulties in trying to determine what our work participation would be for our clients and how we were going to manage through that time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Should we transition to Delia and Barbara?
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Delia Smith. I'm the Director of Economic Support here for the United Nations. And I am here with Barbara Mentoxen, who is the TANF Program Manager or Economic Support Program Manager, and she directly oversees the TANF program. So what we kind of, I'll kind of just give a brief information about what kind of came for us and then have Barb go into detail. But locally, the Oneida Nation is actually a pretty large tribe, and they got a lot of additional funding through different additional funds because of COVID. So we had an excess amount of support systems in the area since COVID, including we had the ERA funding from the U.S. Treasury, and my area was tasked with that program. So we were helping with the emergency rental program. We still are. We got different programs assigned to us through the nation because of funding. So we did experience a time frame since COVID where we were given additional funds and resources because of COVID. And so I know with TANF, Barb was experiencing where there wasn't too many people on because of unemployment. The amount of people that were able to get unemployment, the nation itself dropped down to, right now they have about 2,700 employees. And I think they dropped down to less than 1,000 at the time of COVID. So there was a lot of people that were getting unemployment. So there wasn't that many resources. So we weren't always finding people looking for work. And some of the other programs that I oversee within economic support also seeing that same pattern. So what we did as a larger team is we met starting about last fall, and we created ways to look at how we can become involved in engaging clients. So the team, there was 14 of us, created workshops and different things that we were going to offer to the community. We did postpone the workshops because we offered it, we created it, and then we didn't have much of a turnout, but we're going to restart that once school starts. So October 1st, we're going to jump back in. But Barb, if you kind of want to talk about those, and I don't know if you were given the slides for that one at all, I don't recall.
We do have some slides. We're going to drop them into the chat box as a resource for others.
I gave them initially to, sorry.
But we do have them. They were going to be a resource, but do you need them available?
If you can, just show them.
I'm not sure. Mike or Jesse, do you know if that's possible?
If not, that's fine too. Barb can kind of talk about it. She can go more in detail about that. Okay, Barb.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Barb Mentoxen, Economic Support Program Manager, as introduced earlier. When we're talking about the workshops, yeah, that was a good team effort. Everybody divided, kind of went to which topic they wanted to be involved in. So one of the topics we had was life skills, where we were trying to teach budgeting, money management. Another one of the workshops that we had was soft skills. We're asking different staff to present on that. Another workshop that we had scheduled for customers was easy recipes, how to cook a meal, budgeting your money that you have and making it easy for the family. And another one was wise shopping, how to look at how you shop. Do you buy the name brands? Do you buy the generic brands? Something that would also help save money during this time. We also worked with the TANF pandemic funds. And with that, we offered households 4 choices of a benefit that they could receive from this pandemic fund. And those choices were like household supplies, PPE equipment, winter clothing, laptop reimbursement, because we realized a lot of families don't have access to a laptop, but we could help them reimburse if they purchased one. And then we used our funding also to help in our community by offering a beef and buffalo package from our tribal farm. Each one of these items was a benefit of $250 to the family. So they could choose 2 of the items. And then that was pretty helpful. We're just wrapping that up probably within the next couple weeks here. A lot of families took advantage of that. I'm trying to think of what other workshops we had. Oh, we had a cultural workshop that we wanted people to come in and learn about who they are as a person of the nation. And we worked with our cultural heritage department so that they could come in and talk to anyone that was interested of how our world began, how our creation story came about. And we did have one of those workshops, but it was very, very interesting, even for myself, to learn some of the things that happened before, because our creation story says the woman fell through the sky, but there was a lot of things that occurred before that that we didn't know about, and that is important to know about. Trying to think of what other workshops that we have. I think there was one specifically on budgeting. I'm not sure. I would know better if I seen the list, but I don't have that available. So yeah, it's been a challenge for us. There was a lot of people utilizing the services from the emergency funds. And now that those funds are coming to an end, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be needing help, needing a job now. And we're trying to talk amongst our staff and collaborate with our WIA program and our Community Education Center on different workshops that we can be offering in addition to the ones we already developed that can help better prepare people for a job. And then we also would need to be getting back out and contacting employers ourselves. We just did our summer youth program. That was very successful, and staff were contacting the site supervisors where they provided very good feedback on the youth this summer. And one of the success stories we just heard a couple weeks ago was from our tribal library. They said, oh, we just wanted to call you and let you know that we just hired a tribal member who used to be a summer youth worker for us. She's now a full-time employee of the library. So that was a good thing to hear. But we need to do more in the area of engaging with employers in the community. That's all I have for now.
Thank you so much. Lana?
Sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Lana Chand. I'm Director of the Employment and Training Department at Gila River Indian Community, and I've been here for 31 years. We are located south of Phoenix. Tribal population is approximately 22,000 people. I oversee the NEW program, the WIOA state and federal programs, tribal internship program, the AmeriCorps program, and TARO, and a lot of, or all of the career pathways programs. In 2012, we got a $3 million grant to create a career pathway system at Gila River, and we created 5 industry sectors: construction, medical, fire apprenticeship, hospitality, and small business. So career pathways is my expertise, I guess you could say, and it's really paramount in engaging employers. We've had a lot of situations since the pandemic. These employers didn't want to go forward with their sector training programs. So there was a freeze. They didn't want to take any WEX people that we could train. The clients were too busy training their kids at home without computers. So we had a myriad of, complications with, of course, like everybody else with the pandemic. But to overcome it, we learned to work virtually. We have 2 in-house trainers who did, it was a struggle at first because we did everything by WebEx or Zoom. And so learning the technology was difficult for even our staff. We did get CARES Act funding, which we purchased 20 laptops that we were able to give out to clients if they needed them to go to school. You know, a lot of the schools shut down too. So we, you know, of course, we had a lot of different problems. But overall, at the end, we learned to navigate the technology. And now as we're coming out of the pandemic and we're getting back to, you know, we have some clients starting to come back through, employers are loosening up their web or their work site so that they will take on people. We know that going forward, we're going to have a blend of both in-person and virtual trainings and meetings and things like that. So yeah, it was really tough struggle. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to have more of a facilitated discussion. I have some questions that I'd like to ask all of our panelists. And actually, you've begun to answer some of these, especially the first one. So if there's any additional details, please feel free to add them here. So my first question is, how has COVID impacted your program's ability to forge employment and other partnerships, as well as connect customers to these in-demand jobs that we're hearing about? So we can start with Jonathan, then Lana, then Delia, and or Barbara.
Good morning, everybody, once again. Really and honestly, what COVID did to us early on was, just like I said, with us being so new to TANF and trying to get adjusted to all the requirements, it was hard for us because they basically had us all work from home, and having a lot of resources, we were able to kind of pre-plan on how we would address any aspect of having to work from home, work remotely. So we actually prepped by assigning mobile units for our staff to be able to work remotely, whether it be out in the field, whether it be from home, in those situations. So we continue to provide a service for our TANF clients and others. But also associated with that was how could we address their work participation? Within the first 2 months of working from home, things like that, we did exempt them from any participation. And then early on in June, it was determined that we were going to be returning back to work from our offices. So from that, we were allowed to return. And so we began to basically go back into our work participation with our clients. With that, it did hinder our development as far as new sites, things like that. However, we actually work a lot locally with our local workforce development boards. We have an organization which is called NORA, which is the Northeast Oklahoma Regional Alliance, which is basically a collective of local businesses, regional universities, different agencies, whether it be from a human services aspect or employment aspect. And so with that, they provide us with a lot of information that pertain to the unemployment rates, what were in-demand jobs within our area. And so with that, we were able to collaborate with them. And with our program, we're fortunate enough that we are actually housed within our career services department within Cherokee Nation, which basically operates all of the employment and training programs for the tribe. So with that there, we were able to reconnect with our internal programs to develop, whether it be training, work experience opportunities, on the job training opportunities for our clients, and be able to refer them as they already had pre-established relationships with different employers. But what it also allowed us to do was to form new relationships, not directly within just TANF itself, but overall for the department. Part of that was through receiving additional fundings through all the COVID funding that came through, ARPA funding and such. 2 programs that were developed through our Tribal Economic Development program was a lineman class, electrical lineman. Another was a fiber class, which was basically laying out fiber lines for communication with internet, things like that. So those were 2 of the formations that came out that were a high demand area. Also included with that was, of course, health. And of course, within our Cherokee Nation organization was the hospitality end. We experienced a lot of turnover within our hospitality area. All of the basic, whether it be servers, blackjack dealers, all the regular gaming operations, they were seeing a higher turnover rate and they were needing a direct source of employment. So they reached out to us, and of course we helped do direct referrals of clients, assist with any type of referrals for job fair opportunities that they were hosting, just a variety of different aspects. So it did hinder our employment partnerships with a lot of development, but as we began to return to a normal process within the office, we were able to rekindle those relationships and develop even more that are still ongoing and producing very well for us.
Diana, it looks like you were,
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I didn't know if I should be, okay. I just have 3 additional things. I think I said a lot of the struggles. I explained those to you already, but in addition, we get our NEW referrals through DES. Well, they stopped referring altogether. So that was a real challenge because with them not referring, we had to go out and try to recruit them. But of course they were at home, like I said, teaching their children's school. They didn't have the technology to do anything more than, they had to stay at home with their kids. But we were able to continue to plan, at least with our career pathways employers, even though they wouldn't accept anybody on site because of the pandemic, we were still able to plan. The third thing was, even right now, we're still struggling to get employees to take positions. So what our tribe is doing now is a compensation study to maybe address, some salary, maybe the salaries are too low or whatever, but we have so many openings right now. We have so many jobs available and we don't know why people aren't coming in to apply. So we're still try to figure that out. That's all.
All right. Delia or Barb, do you have anything to add?
I would just add on to what Lana says, we have over 90 positions on our tribal website for open positions. And we struggle with the same thing, getting people hired. I also oversee the WIOA program, and we've done a lot of outreach lately to Brown County, to our internal Indian preference department to see what, resources are there. We still don't have any people on TANF cash. That's still a low number of people. I'm not too sure where people are going. The nation actually just did a compensation study here about a year ago that increased the wages significantly, almost all the way across. The nation's minimum wage is $15 an hour. And that is for any position is the minimal. So the wages here are in comparison to local is quite, for me, when I look at it, it's pretty compensating. Right now, we don't pay insurance, or we don't have to pay our insurance costs. So insurance for us right now is absolutely free. So it's really hard. I think, we see it across the board, like people are they're not getting unemployment, they're not working. We're not too sure what the issue is. In Wisconsin here, Barb also works with our state income maintenance, which is our SNAP and medical program. They'll be doing some programming in the next few months. Their extensions and so on for COVID will be ending soon, for like full benefits and looking at different exemptions. So things will maybe change, I'm thinking, in the beginning of the year as some of these things stop offering. I mean, it sucks to say, but I think some of these additional resources have kind of created this unusual employment situation. Barb, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, our staff will be tasked as soon as the state lifts their public health emergency declaration with reviewing all the Medicaid cases that we have in our agency, and some people are going to be losing their health care. But again, hopefully that will help them to say, hey, I need to get a job. I know I need to find a job that offers me health care. I don't know, it kind of seems like all these services that have been available have relaxed people from wanting to go out and seek a job because they were getting full benefits and food share. They're getting health care that wasn't going to end no matter what. And also that they had unemployment, and they had extra unemployment for a while. So now it's time to say goodbye to those programs, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. But hopefully we can be there to help them to find jobs, to seek good paying jobs. Like I said, like Delia said, the tribe's minimum wage is $15 an hour. That's what our summer youth were getting paid. And they enjoyed that. And, that's another thing to look at, not just looking at the adults in the household, but also to look at the family, the youth that are able to work. Can they get a part-time job someplace? Maybe we can help them with that if they need help with that. So that's kind of where we're at right now, in addition to what Delia already said.
All right, great. Well, you saw early in the chat that there were a lot of items that people identified as barriers, and you certainly listed some of those as the same or even additional ones. And so now I'd like to transition and talk a little bit more about sort of what is working well or what seems promising with respect to employment in your areas, particularly what seems promising related to your employment partnerships and customer engagement. If you can talk a little bit about that, that would be great. Just want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, I wanted to talk about career pathways as being a win-win for everyone. I don't know how many people have been engaged in that process or that development of that system, but it's a win-win for everybody, because the whole concept of career pathways is that the employers design the programs. And once the employers get invested in the program, it's great for the participants because they're at the front line, they're choosing the participants, they're choosing the schools, their workforce, like how we did it, workforce was the convener. So we held the meetings, we made sure the people came together, all the employers, all the partners. We held the meetings, but the employers were ahead of it. Now you're going to hear a lot of career pathways programs are with the university, or schools, but they need to engage the employers. That's the main concept of career pathways, is it's an employer-driven system. So it's work-based learning, it's all the educational options, it's stackable credentials, flexible schedules, recognized credentials, work readiness, support services, use of technology. When you're developing this, you go to the head as high up as you can to get the blessing. And then we typically work with the HR people. And you find a champion, that person that is really going to champion the effort within that organization. And you've got a win-win, because it's been the most successful employer engagement that we have ever had. And I would recommend it to everyone to at least try it. I'm willing. I think my slides are in the chat probably right now, but I'm willing to help anybody along, or if anybody wants more information, just let me know. Thank you.
And what about for you, Jonathan?
Okay. Well, with ours and stuff, I mean, really what seemed real promising was just the outreach and having those resources of our local workforce development boards and kind of helping us engage in new areas that we were unfamiliar with. And of course, here in Oklahoma, we do have some pretty wild weather. Anything can come off pretty close. We never know what to expect. They may say it's going to rain, but then here's a tornado, things like that. So And part of that came out of that was we actually experienced, a pretty bad ice storm and everything that heavily damaged a lot of our electrical, things like that. Well, what happened, of course, with the COVID pandemic, there wasn't very many workers out there anymore. So that was an identified need. And so developing specialized, customized trainings to suit the needs of not only your communities, but also what the local employers are needing. And just like I said, that has developed a great relationship, not only between our vocational centers, our regional universities, but also all the local employers that provide that type of service. And that goes across the board, whether it was, within the electrical scope of things, hospitality, healthcare. Healthcare was also sparked. We saw a shortage of EMTs, CMAs, just a variety of healthcare providers. And so with a lot of the funding that we received for COVID, we sparked a lot of those short-term trainings. So individuals were able to access that training and get into direct employment because a lot of our internal processes with our HR, they began to waive some of the requirements for healthcare workers to come in and immediately go to work after they receive certifications. So that is what helped us spark an increase in trying to get the volume of healthcare workers there. Childcare was also another. It was a collaboration between the state, regional universities, and our programs to provide CDA courses and get them directly associated with that. Even prior childcare workers were able to get advanced degrees in that field, and the state of Oklahoma actually provided some incentives for them to complete those degrees. So they got that benefit and also providing back to their local communities and providing that resource for childcare.
Thank you. Barbara, Delia?
I was just
Anything
gonna
Okay.
add that I think for COVID and dealing with employment, I think one of the biggest things we had to overcome or create was our ability to connect with the community. Our doors only opened to the public back in June. Otherwise, we've been behind closed doors working as is every day. So what we had to learn, or I would say we have an intake coordinator, she learned how to make sure like all of our forms are up to date, updated our website. She created our forms to be all PDF fill-in, so no one really had to come into the office to pick up forms. Just a lot of learning on our parts to make sure we could connect and make our resources available to everybody. We had one building that I also oversee is the Community Education Center. Became like a job center because that was the only building that was actually open. And so a lot of people were there. So we helped with job search stuff there, resumes, helping with unemployment. So we kind of went where the people were, I guess, and we tried to really just make, because of the situation, all the resources as available and well known as we could. So that was something that we did see improved and increased connection with the community that way. And a lot of positive comments from people that understood. There's still a lot of people that we know that aren't techie that really can't even go through some of those documents or paperwork, but we still tried our best.
Great, thank you. I want to encourage people to put your questions into the chat. We have one last question for the panelists from me, but if you would insert your questions into the chat, that would be great. So if you could very quickly give advice to everyone who's listening, whether they're with a Tribal TANF program and or a new program, what advice would you give them, excuse me, with respect to employment partnerships and job attachment?
I think that it would be good to survey your community to see what they need. What do they need to get back into the employment field? Because there are people that lost jobs because of the pandemic, and now they have to get a different type of job. Maybe they need retraining. Maybe they need to just know where to go look. Maybe they need help with a resume, things like that. I think we need to find out from our customer base, what is it that you need us to help you with? That's all I have.
Any other advice, Lana?
I would just say 3 things that I would recommend in any kind of employer partnership. And that would be to get the employer buy-in from as top as you can go, the CEO, the whatever, just get that buy-in. That's so important. And make sure everybody has skin in the game. In other words, we've gone to employers before where we have this program, blah, blah, blah. But if they don't have, if they're not providing any resource or any additional funding, or it's not a partnership and they have less of a buy-in to hire, if it becomes their program, then they're all into it, and they'll find resources like you've never seen before. The other thing is, one of the mistakes we made was we didn't build in support for the clients. We didn't anticipate that the academic levels were lower than we thought, and that they needed the help to go through some of the employer training. And so those 3 things would be what I would recommend.
And Jonathan?
Primarily, I would say to think outside the box, but don't abandon, the things that have worked for you. Because traditionally, we just need to adapt to what our current situation is, because a lot of things that we've already put in place, will carry on and move forward, but they can be reshaped to adjust to what our current environment is. Also, I can't stress enough, if you have local workforce development boards or regional groups and alliances, get involved with them, because just like you said, they can provide a lot of additional statistics that can be useful for your programs on what you offer and what you would actually approve for someone. Because there's countless times where individuals come in for, retraining or look to get into a certain type of training. However, the employment possibility is not there. It doesn't exist because that field may be saturated in your area. And it's hard to tell someone, hey, that's probably not necessarily the area you want to go into, but of course, when their mind's made up, that's where they're at. And then also, the last thing I would probably suggest is, if your tribe or agency has an employment and training department, tap into them, because a lot of times, I've seen some of that disconnect between TANF and employment and training, that it doesn't exist. And so that relationship needs to be developed, because just like you said, they're going to be that direct line for you. And also get the opinions of your frontline workers. I mean, they are the ones directly working with the clientele that comes in. They are the ones being expressed what ideas, what type of trades, things like that, that individuals are being involved with or interested in. So, I mean, just listen, primarily to the direct line staff that's there, and also what's working around you.
Thank you all for those tips and advice. That's very helpful. We do have a couple of questions in the chat that we will get to in just a second, and hopefully you can provide some quick responses. But first, we'd like to put up a poll for all the participants to respond to. If we could get the poll up, the poll question. So what additional training or technical assistance might be helpful to you and your team on this topic? Think about the challenges that you inserted into the chat earlier. Think about the things that you heard today, the challenges that the panelists face, and also the advice that they shared. Please go ahead and share your responses. You can just click on one of those answers in the poll that's popped up on the screen, and then press submit. So what additional training or TA might be helpful to you and your team on this topic? I think your responses will be very helpful to OFA as we think about how collectively we can continue to explore and provide support to you and your programs around employment. And so while people are answering those questions or answering that question on the poll, Lana, there was a question for you. Do you have a program outline for the Career Pathways program that you discussed?
Yes, there is an entire manual for it. And if you want to, I think, is my contact information there? Because I can email that to you. Anybody who's interested in it, there's a whole manual on how to develop a career pathway system.
We do have your bio information, but if at some point, if someone could insert Lana's information into the chat, or even after this session, Lana, if you have an opportunity to insert it to into the chat to everyone, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the poll results. So, this is all pretty evenly split, about a third for each. 1/3 wanting to hear more about promising practices, about 1/3 wanting to receive additional information about economic and employment trends, and then another third would be interested in reviewing tools on how to establish employer partnerships. Thank you for sharing that information, and we will definitely take your responses into consideration as we continue to move forward. Let's see, there was another quick question. How are you screening or assessing participants to determine their career desires and then finding employers or training that to align with participant goals? Does one of the panelists have a response for that? How are you screening or assessing participants and then helping to align that with employers as you're trying to find employers?
This is Lana Chanda. We are utilizing TABE and like an interest test and career scope. So aptitude, any kind of testing that we can do will give us more information on the client. And it was the question about how you give that to employers? Or yeah, we do that prior to, we follow the WIOA system. We do the assessment first, do the plan, and contact the appropriate employers.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. Does anyone else have a quick response to that question?
This is Jonathan Crittenden. We do a similar process. What we do when we encounter someone that doesn't necessarily know what type of career they're seeking, we do what's called the Oklahoma Career Guide. It's a career assessment survey that's provided through the state of Oklahoma. And basically it just identifies normally anywhere from 3 to 5 career pathways that they can follow. And then of course it breaks down into potential actual occupations. And from there, if they identify something that they may be interested in, then we look to see whether or not there is a local vocational center that offers that type of training that's required. And of course, what type of experience is needed. And also whether or not there's local employers that provide that. And so when we look at the matching with an employer, we check with our job developers to see if there's a local employer that provides that type of occupation. If not, we see whether or not we can find a business that provides that occupation that we can basically either develop work experience or OJT contract with them, or if we could do a direct referral just for direct hire.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we are at time, or just a few minutes over, and I apologize about that, but I definitely would like to thank our panelists and Dr. Jorgensen for all of the great advice and information that you provided today. Lana has dropped her email into the chat box. If there are additional questions for anyone on the panel or for the Office of Family Assistance, you can still feel free to send those and we will work to get responses to you. So we hope that this session has been informative. Thank you everyone for your time today. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have another transition. We have another video for you, a quick tip video. We think these videos are fabulous. I mean, we appreciate everyone who's contributed to developing the videos and filming them. This next one includes, someone who just spoke, Jonathan Crittenden. So we want to play this next quick tip video, and in it you will hear from Jonathan with Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. And during the video, Jonathan will share some of his tips to building employer partnerships in today's economy. So building on what we were just speaking about. So thank you and please enjoy.
My name is Jonathan Crittenden, Program Manager for the Cherokee Nation Jobs Tribal TANF program. Our program operates within the Cherokee Nation Career Services Department, which operates both federally and tribally funded employment and training related services. Operating within Career Service has not only allowed us to develop employment partnerships both internally and externally, but has allowed us to expand various services to our clientele. Many of the employment partnerships have been forged through the collaboration of the various department services that we offer, including our WIOA programs, our National Dislocated Worker Grants, our reentry program, our vocational rehabilitation program, as well as our tribal economic development program. In addition to these internal collaborations, we also team up with local workforce development boards, which are comprised of local business owners, community organizations, local universities, and various state agencies. These key strategic partnerships are essential to providing in-demand jobs to our TANF clientele. These alliances allow us insight into local regional markets, high growth industries within our area, and what training is required by local employers. One thing to remember when developing employment relationships is to break the mold. Think outside the box. Get out of your comfort zone. It is all a collaborative effort. In order to establish something that will be long lasting, you have to be insightful of what is around you, what is required, and what is the ultimate goal. Is it just about jobs, or is it about a career? What type of education is needed? What training is needed? How can you quickly expand or customize to adhere to what your region is requiring, what your local market wants? Local employers are very specific on what they look for. So gaining that insight, whether it's collaboration through that employer or through a local workforce development board, will be key to establishing strategic partnerships. If your program or tribe offers employment and training related services or has an economic development program, tap into that resource. That is a key essential resource for your program, as they have much insight into what the industry standards are in your local labor markets. These partnerships are key to providing work experience, training, everything that is required by these local markets. Also, when establishing employment partnerships, remember to provide them with an outlet to reach your clients. Whether it's hosting a job fair, a meet and greet, hosting them at a community meeting, any effort that allows them to access your clients and know what their needs are, what their skill set is, their knowledge, what are their abilities? Is there offerings for on-the-job training? Or is there a potential for a development of customized training to fit the needs of the employer? These are all ways that can reach the clients, but also establish a stronger partnership with your local employers.
Hello, everyone. This is Jessie Kendall again from ICF. First of all, I want to just thank again our panelists for that really wonderful, enriched discussion. I'd also just like to point out again, we were able to add some additional information, both from Lana as well as Barb, with respect to their programs in the chat. So feel free to download those PDFs and learn more about their work and their efforts. In my excitement, I also added some slides from one of our panelists or facilitators for the next session. So wanted to just note that as well, from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. So that was added as well, and we can share that again later. So we're about to transition into another breakout session. And this session will last a little under an hour. We're running about 4 minutes fast, so we'll try to make that time up. But as we sort of talked about yesterday, as we closed yesterday's day, today is a thematic day, meaning we are covering for the length of our time together this topic of employment partnerships and jobs. And so we just had a wonderful presentation on that topic to sort of ground everyone in the topic and economic trends. What we're going to do in a moment is transition into one of 4 breakout rooms. And each of those breakout rooms are going to be led by a Tribal TANF or new program leader, some of whom you just heard from in the last moderated panel. And this will be an opportunity truly for conversation and informal discussion to start to talk about some of the challenges some of you shared at the top of the last session, to share some of those innovative and promising practices I know so many of you wanted to talk about and hear from one another in today's meeting. I will also note during those breakout sessions, we're not recording those sessions. There will be a note taker, one of my colleagues in the room, but they aren't going to be writing down anyone's name or what they say, or even attributing anything to any singular program. They might just jot down a couple bulleted notes, but it won't be attributed to anyone or any one program. And so our hope is truly that it is an opportunity to engage and discuss, to ask questions, to share your best and greatest ideas. I think one thing Jonathan talked about was thinking outside of the box. This is an opportunity to have some of those conversations together on this topic. From a logistics standpoint, everyone's going to be randomly assigned into one of those 4 breakout rooms. And again, you'll have a little under an hour together. If you can go to the next slide. If for some reason you don't receive an invite to join a breakout room, please just use the chat box and tech support can help move you into a room. But again, it'll be a random assignment. If you see the box come up with the room assignments, just hit join. And you will be placed in one of those 4 rooms. Immediately after this session, this exchange, this informal exchange, we will be having a break. Will probably be about 25 minutes, give or take. But this next session will end at about 12:45 Eastern Time, 11:45 Central, 10:45. If you're a mountain, well, about 25-30 minutes for a break. And then we'll come back together in this main room for our next conversation and session. Any questions about that? All right, let's have, so I'm going to share where we're about to go next. As you guys might recall, I had shared this the other day. Today's session is all focused on employment partnerships and jobs. And we first had a wonderful presentation about a lot of resources were shared, a wonderful video by Jonathan. Thank you again. And then there was an opportunity to talk about it in some informal exchange. And now we're about to move into an opportunity to create something together relating to this same topic of jobs and employment partnerships. And really what we're going to be doing is an activity together. We're going to have 4 breakout rooms again, and I'll explain sort of how we're going to break up in a moment. And we are going to have a facilitator in each room, myself and actually a few of my colleagues. And we are going to share our screens, and we'll have an activity sheet up on those screens. And we're going to walk through that activity together. And the whole point here is to honestly brainstorm together, to draw from the practices, your innovative practices, your promising practices, or the things that you're doing, as well as the challenges that you might be facing, to jot down some ideas together. And then what we'll do is clean up these activity sheets and share them with you so that you can use them, or that your teams can use them at a later time. So our hope is that this will be a useful takeaway for you that you can have and use with your teams, and that reflects the best thinking and ideas from your peers, from folks on the call. Now, like the last session, nothing's going to be recorded during this conversation. The only notes that will get taken at all are the ones you're going to see on the screen that we take to capture takeaways, but they're not going to be attributed to any one program or any one person. It's really, truly, hopefully going to try to just create a resource for each of you that you can use and take away. Now, some of you may be on the phone. If you are, our facilitators will be articulating what's on the screen so that you can participate and come off mute. The worksheets that we will be working through were also emailed to everyone who's attending the event on Monday. So if you happen to be on the phone and want to pull up that worksheet, now would be the time to do that. If you're in the Zoom room and able to see the screen, no need to do that. We will pull it up once we get into the breakout rooms. Next slide. So here's what we're going to do. As you can see, we have a map of the United States in front of us, and it is broken up into different regions. As you all know, this is the meeting for regions 4 through 8. So what our thought is that each of you are going to self-select into the breakout room with your region. So everyone, for example, in regions 4 and 7 will self-select into the room with the button that says regions 4 and 7. Now, if you're wondering, shoot, which region am I in? This is the time to take a look at the map to see. So for example, region 4 is in the southeast. We're talking Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, North Carolina. That was pretty good that I just did that off the cuff. That's region 4. Region 7, middle of the country, yellow states on this map. You can see Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, etc. Nebraska, can't forget Nebraska. So again, regions 4 and 7, you will be in a room together. We'll then have region 5, and that's the green states. You can see Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, etc. Then we have region 6 down in the south, in the middle of the country, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, etc. And finally, cannot forget about region 8. So if you're in region 8, you will press that button. That's Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. Whew. All right. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Concerns? All right. Next slide. Okay, so in a moment, the screen's going to come up for you to choose your breakout room. Again, regions 4 and 7, 5, 6, 8. If you missed the last thing that I was just saying and are not sure where to go, please use the chat box, and tech support will help make sure you get to the right room. We'll be spending about 50 minutes or so doing this activity together. So thank you so much. Let's go to where we're supposed to go. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's about 2:15 Eastern time. Ooh, we're a little ahead of schedule. We are going to wrap up and close for the day. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for your participation today. As you know, today's theme was employment and jobs and employment partnerships. I hope that you were able to take away a good bit of concrete advice and suggestions and ideas and innovations. As I was just saying in the last breakout room where we created something together, we'll be cleaning up those notes and make sure that they're circulated for everyone so that you can see what other groups talked about too, and hopefully use those resources as a takeaway going forward, not just for yourselves, but for your teams. Can you go to the next slide? So tomorrow we are going to come back together again one more time at 10:30 Eastern. That's 9:30 Central, 8:30 Mountain, in this same platform. And we are going to use a similar construct as we did today, meaning we are going to learn about a topic, we are going to chat about it, and then we're going to create something again together. And then at the end of our session tomorrow, we're also having a wonderful, I would say even inspirational speaker to close us out at the end. But tomorrow's thematic focus is on some of the things that we've been hearing all throughout today, actually, which has to do with support services. Those supports, whether they be childcare, transportation, or mental health or otherwise, that help enable customers and their families to attach to work and jobs. So that'll be tomorrow. Thank you again so much for your participation today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day and afternoon. Thank you.